Welcome to Sitting with Spirit. Take what resonates, leave the rest. It's interesting because as I was tapping into the messages this week, I kind of intuitively feel like there's already so much to hold within this episode. So the angel messages are kind of brief, but one thing that kind of made me laugh was how sometimes our angels and guides use our own emotions and memories as examples of what they're trying to get to with the message. And before we even started recording, I've been feeling this like irritability and frustration. I was talking about it with Claire before we pressed record, and she and I were kind of like shaking out and just like letting the energy move past us, taking deep breaths. But when I sat with our angels and guides, I actually realized that this anger and irritability is part of the message for the week. And that with Mars retrograde, Mars is the planet of like action, sexuality, warrior energy, but it's also the planet of aggression and anger and confrontation. And it feels like this is a powerful week for revisiting old anger that we carry in the heart space. So it feels like a moment to look at like where can we lighten the load on our heart space a little bit? And I just feel kind of uncomfortable emotions coming up. It's not even that they're that intense. For some of you, it might be, but it's more about like looking into the uncomfortable anger, victim consciousness, frustration, all of the things within that umbrella so we can process it and move forward and get the information from those emotion messengers. It just feels like this week irritability might be heightened, but it's in a similar way that almost like during a full moon, the emotional dial is turned up so that it can be clear to us what we need to release. And so that's what Mars retrograde is doing too. It's turning the dial up on irritability and anger to see where we need more patience, where we need more release, where we can maybe move forward in more efficient ways. So definitely anger, irritability, also maybe looking at our relationship to masculine energy because Mars rules masculine energy as well. So kind of like maybe looking at even old anger or trapped dynamics or things like that within the spectrum of masculine energy, anger, and how we go for what we want. So as soon as here's how you know it's a message and not your own emotion is that as soon as you name it and recognize it, it goes away. So, like sometimes in readings, I'll be feeling a headache and I'll be like, what the heck? I didn't have a headache 2 seconds ago. I'm like, oh, it's their headache. It's their message about overthinking. And as soon as I say it, it's gone. So, that's just a little tip for you. And yeah, so that leads me to heart chakra upgrades. And I really do feel like that's a big theme this week. And part of the upgrade around the heart chakra is just accepting and listening and processing to the uncomfortable emotions because that concept of uncomfortable emotion keeps coming up. And maybe in the past, we would have said a mantra over it or debated the uncomfortable emotions or tried to talk ourselves out of our reality. But it's actually so powerful to just sit with the unapologetic truth of how you really feel. Because if you won't do that, who will? And then your inner child, like we talked about in this episode, your body will be screaming to get your attention. And so it just feels really important to just have a radical authenticity with the truth of your heart space. And that is going to be one of the best ways you can love yourself because true self-love isn't showing up how you think you should or trying to be perfect. It's really showing up for yourself authentically through the lowest lows and the highest highs and loving yourself for every single part of it. And then I saw an interesting symbol, which was the symbol of home and family, and it had some shadow over it. And I felt like the shadow was kind of multifaceted and take the layer that resonates with you because this is for the collective and it's for a lot of people. So there's a few different like aspects to the shadow. One is that it feels tied to the unknown. I feel like for some people, there's something with like, am I moving? Am I getting a new place? Are we changing locations? Like things like that. It just feels like an actual question mark. But for a lot of us, I feel like there's deeper healing, cycle breaking, and examination of things that have been pushed under the rug. And that's where the shadow comes out in a different way, is like what's hidden. And so I feel like there's something about kind of shining light on the shadows of our inner world. And I feel like part of this heart chakra upgrade is a call to deeper vulnerability, especially for people who are uncomfortable sort of digging a little deeper and not just coasting by in this survival mode place. It's like we've gotten really good at that. And now it's time to peel back a deeper layer to be seen and excavated and worked through. And especially within the context of our relationship to family, to patterns of unhealthy behavior within our family. And then the last layer of this is kind of uncertainty around timing or how with creating our own family and sort of doing the shadow work that we need to do to create healthier dynamics. So there's a layer of cycle breaking with this image. There's a layer of sort of shadow around, will I have my own family or what will that look like? So this feels very layered to me. So take the aspect of it that resonates with you, but there's just themes of deeper working through inner world, rewiring vulnerability. And again, keep coming back to this like diving headfirst into the discomfort instead of avoiding the discomfort, sort of shining your light directly on it and saying, come at me, because I'm not taking the discomfort as a sign of my shortcomings or my failure. I'm actually just taking it as information so that I can better understand and therefore love myself and therefore validate my own experience because I really understand what I'm feeling. It feels like a powerful week for that, and that is very much tied to Mars retrograde. And what I'm just actually putting together now is that Mars retrograde cycle is going to be in Leo and Cancer. And Leo is the sign of the heart, of biological children and sort of our own ways that we let ourselves shine. And Cancer is the sign of home and family. And I wasn't even thinking about that. So these themes are really coming up to be revisited, especially like the theme of what did your family do with anger? Did you push it under the rug? Was it not safe to feel emotions? Was it not safe to talk about emotions? Like, where were things kind of secret or pushed down or not dealt with? And now you're perpetuating that cycle with trying to talk yourself out of your own emotions or your own truth of your heart space. This actually leads me to the spirit that we had come through. It was a father energy in spirit. And he seemed like a really interesting man who was doing the best he could, but I feel that he had an anger problem and really struggled with anger. And a part of that was due to the dynamic with his parents, especially his dad. And I got this really interesting feeling that he was on some level aware that he didn't want you to have the same childhood experience that he did. But instead of sort of being warm and open and available, it's almost like he hid himself away or kept distance or tried to love you in a different way, which is really interesting because I got this message in an angel reading not too long ago about a woman that came to me, and her vein of cycle breaking was not being the parent that she thought she should be in response to the trauma of her childhood, but being the parent that her child was asking her to be. So, like, she couldn't understand, I don't get it. I had it so hard, and my parents did all of these things, and I'm doing my best to be this type of parent for her in response to what they were for me. But her angels were like, no, it's not about that response. It's about you showing up for her how she needs you to show up. And so I think this is kind of in a similar vein with this spirit's message of like cycle breaking and showing up in a different way. And so he was responding to how his dad was. So he tried to keep himself a little more stoic or aloof. And it's interesting because his energy feels very layered to me in that I do feel like he was loving and I do feel like he was close to an extent. But then it feels like he was almost a ticking time bomb internally, and that when things got too intense, he would remove himself, and that you might have perceived that as emotional unavailability or that you did something wrong or that you were not lovable enough. I saw a J name with him, like John or Jim. I felt like he could have been more quiet or stoic or to himself, but that there would definitely be moments where it was like warm and loving. I also felt that he died around 65. I felt like he had 2 to 3 kids, and he was especially highlighting the dynamic with the girls. I also felt like there'd be a connection to religion with him, that he would have grew up pretty religious and that he would have maybe found solace in that. And then I also felt like he was with his mom in spirit, and like his mom had her own kind of difficult journey, and that there was a lot of healing on the other side. I felt like he had heart problems. I'm not sure if that's how he passed, but there was definitely pain in the chest. And his message is, I was trying to protect you in the only way I knew how. And sometimes we have to give our parents grace because their approach to parenting us is a response to what didn't work for them in their childhood. Even if they're not able to give us exactly what we need, they're trying their best for their level of awareness. And what he's saying is, it was never about you. He didn't want to mess you up like he felt he was messed up. And I felt like he actually carried a lot of like shame and self-loathing around his anger. And I just felt like he could get to a boiling point and it would be so much like this implosion instead of an explosion because he was trying to protect his family. I also feel like, of course, his perspective in the spirit world is completely different than it was here. And he can understand the pain he caused you a lot more now that he's in spirit, and that there's an apology there, and that it's never anything to do with you. Like, even the fact that he was trying to take new energetic strategies was a reflection of his love. It just wasn't the type of love you needed from him. And I feel like there was always this sense of like wishing you could be closer to your dad, or wishing your dad might have been more involved or more warm, something like that. And him just wanting you to know it was never about love. That was always his way of protecting you. And I do have to say, I feel like a few different fathers in spirit are really tacking on to this. And I feel like for some of you, even if you can't take all of the evidence, there will be 2 to 3 postcards for you. And I just want you to know there's quite a few fathers in the spirit world that want this message to be shared. So focus on the message. And if you can take the message and even 2 to 3 pieces of the evidence, know it's for you too. And so I think, again, this ties into the ancestral cycle breaking. And actually, in your own way, your dad was a cycle breaker. And I think that that's really beautiful because he made a new choice. And it might not have been the choice that you needed in the moment, but I have a lot of grace for our parents who are doing the best they can because they are cycle breakers. And we don't know the kind of trauma that they came from sometimes. And we have to give them the grace for trying to break a cycle in the best way that they know how. And then we, as the next generation, can break the next layer of the cycle. And so I'm just sending a lot of love to everybody out there because I think this Mars retrograde cycle is really bringing up a lot and excavating a lot out of the heart space. And it was interesting to me that themes of anger and masculine energy, and then this father in spirit came up. So whatever uncomfortable emotions are coming up, whatever shadows are being sort of revealed, wherever home life stuff feels shadowy or unknown or confusing, just sit with the truth on your heart and do the best that you can moment to moment. It's okay if you don't have all the answers. I think anger is such an important messenger, and sort of similar to how when you get the message, it can go away. I think when we try to run from our anger, self-medicate to not feel the anger, blame other people for the anger, the messenger emotion continues and continues. And I think when we just feel the anger and process the anger and locate where the anger is living in our body, we are not our anger. We are not our emotions. So I think that just feeling it to heal it is also another really important message with this Mars retrograde energy.
Yeah, I love that you spoke on that because it's some healing work I'm trying to do for myself. And there's definitely been a lot of big feelings coming up lately. And I think, we have this instinct of like, I don't want to feel this and I want to fix it or have an answer so I don't have to feel this. I think sometimes the answer is just like giving ourselves that safe space to feel it and being compassionate with ourselves that we feel it, and knowing that, family dynamics are tough, and our parents were doing the best they could with the pain body that they were dealing with. And so they maybe weren't able to show up for you in ways that you needed, but most likely it was because of what they were coping with. And now, as I see what I'm coping with, I have more empathy for the fact that maybe I didn't receive what I needed in certain moments, and just being gentle with them and myself while I move through it.
Absolutely. I love that. And I think like so many of us in our community think of ourselves as cycle breakers, which is true. But what we might not realize is that the previous generation were cycle breakers too. And they help move the ball forward in their own way. And I think that that's a really beautiful perspective to take. And I know as we're leading into the holidays, there's so much emphasis on wishing our family looked a certain way, or attachment to outcomes with family, or deeper triggers with family. So just be easy on yourself as much as possible. And I just loved this father in spirit because he felt so precious to me. It felt like his heart was really in the right place. And it just felt like he might have even had some undiagnosed mental health stuff. And I'm not sure if anger issues are a technical mental health thing. I'm not sure on that, but it just felt like sometimes his emotions ranged to a place that he couldn't control them. And so for that reason, he was sort of staying away or creating distance. But when I felt into his energy, like there was such a preciousness there, and there was such a love for his family there. And I think there was like a deep, well, self-loathing of like, I wish I could be different, but I can't, so I'll stay away.
That's such a hard thing to think about. And, I think it's also a lesson for us of like, we don't do a service to people when we hide away because we think that what we're feeling or going through is too much. It's like it serves all of us to be with what we're going through and allow it to show itself, and allow ourselves to find a way to heal it so that we can show up for everyone in our life the way that they want us to be with them. Like our loved ones cherish us, even if in some moments it feels like you're like, oh, it'd be better if I just wasn't here. It's like none of the people that love you feel that way. That's just your pain speaking. And moving through that pain so that you can show up for your loved ones is such a gift to yourself and them.
I agree. And I was seeing this image as you were speaking of this dad looking into his daughter's face when she was very little. And it was just pure adoration and love. And he couldn't bear for that to change. And when we are kids and we idolize our parents and we love them so much, if they have unhealed things within them, it's hard for them to accept that, or it's hard for them to believe they can continue that. And so they might have their own coping mechanisms that never had anything to do with you. And in fact, in their own twisted way, might have been because they love you. They didn't want to disappoint you or let you down or hurt you or sort of disappoint you in terms of your vision of how you saw them.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting how when you're little, your parents are like these entities that aren't people, they're your parents. And then, I think most of us have a realization as we become adults where we're like, oh, they're not gods. They are just other people, like how I'm a person and I might have a kid now. Like they had their own hangups and worries and insecurities. I think that can be really healing to recognize that they didn't need to have all the answers to love you and be there for you. Nobody has all the answers, even our parents.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. And the last thing I just feel called to say before we wrap this up is that intense emotions or dark thoughts are not the truth of who you are. It's so easy for us to identify with those feelings, emotions, and thoughts. And our ego wants to filter them into stories about what kind of person we are, but it actually has nothing to do with the truth of who we are. And it's again pointing to deeper layers of healing, which are possible for every single person. And so I just want to leave you with that message before we sign off.
That was a helpful message for me because it can be tough inside my brain, and these emotions feel so heavy and they feel like they are me, and they're not. They're not.
They're not. The truth of who you are is pure spirit, pure love, pure potential. And everything else is a lie that our ego tries to create so that we can expect pattern recognition because that's how we need to survive. So don't take that on as the truth of who you are. You are infinite, infinite magic and potential. So have a beautiful rest of your week, my loves. There is more love around you than you could ever understand.